Hello! Today we're going to be talking about attainment by other equity categories. Very simply, what we're going to discuss is what research tells us regarding inequality in education and thus occupation according to different characteristics. Gender, sexuality, and race. Those are the three that your text concentrates on. However, in the lecture, I'm going to focus on gender. It is well documented and well understood how a person's socioeconomic status does or does not contribute to inequality in education. But what about other characteristics? In some ways, the outcome is optimistic, and in others, not so much. So I'm going to begin with gender, which is a characteristic that has arguably been subject to the most dramatic and drastic change in the education system. One of my absolute favorite topics to discuss in general is gender. What makes a person masculine or feminine, and why do we view certain things in our environment as suitable for girls or boys? And then, how does this affect each one of us as individuals? This has always been considered a hot topic when discussing anything to do with education. But the reason gender was always considered a hot topic in relation to education was because of girls, not boys. In the past, we would have focused solely on women. Issues of inequality, of how female students have always ended up getting the short end of the stick, so to speak. We might talk about access to a truly equal education for female students, how there was historically a gender gap in achievement regarding certain subject areas like math and science, because historically, girls did lag behind in those subjects. And at the same time, boys have not historically done as well in the quieter subjects like reading and writing. We might talk about how at the post-secondary level, female students were underrepresented overall and almost non-existent in certain subject areas. Now this has changed dramatically because of huge changes regarding female students and their position and achievement overall in the education system as a whole. So the issue of gender and education is no longer so narrow, mainly focusing on issues of female students, and instead is now focusing on male students because now they are the ones lagging behind. We all know that changing patterns of work and family life for women and men have been the cause and the effect of changes in the education of women and men over the past century. Most people associate the 60s as the flashpoint for modern feminism. And certainly a great deal of change did occur and was encouraged during that decade that in turn directly affected female education specifically and the education system as a whole. I've referred to these things in previous classes, so just to remind you, there was the publication of The Feminist Mystique by Betty Friedan, Feminine Mystique by Betty Friedan, in which she identified the problem without a name, referring to women realizing that marriage and kids and a house in the suburbs was simply not enough to feel fulfilled, that they wanted to be free to pursue their own educational and occupational accomplishments. In the 60s, we also had the widespread availability of affordable and reliable birth control, which made it possible for women to control their fertility, and the organization of women as a whole to lobby for reform in regards to equal occupational opportunity, better maternity leaves, more effective domestic violence laws, more and better options for childcare. Since the 60s, a feminist movement has continued, but it's a little different from what we saw in the 60s, maybe a little bit less idealistic. And instead of insisting males and females are the same, there is more of a recognition that women and men are different, and that's okay. That this does not necessarily imply something negative, that women and men can be different in some ways, but still equal. Many factors are involved in this, some of which we are all so used to that unless you are in an academic setting and thus forced to take a step back and look at the whole picture, you just no longer see it. if we focus on parenthood for a moment, we know that the majority of women work outside the home full-time after marriage and after becoming a mother. This is the norm for all of you. You've always known a society that was structured in this manner, but looking at the big picture, it's actually a fairly recent change. It was only in the late 70s into the 80s that the majority of women did not work outside the home. And that's why in the education system, students went home for lunch every day in elementary school. Instead, now the vast majority of women enter and stay in the workforce throughout their adult lives. It's no longer just assumed that a woman will be content to leave the workforce for an extended period of time with young children. Which also would mean, if she were to do that, by the way, that she is content to give up her job security, her financial independence, her chances of promotion, and her ability to stay current in her profession. It is now much more unusual to be a stay-at-home mom, and those that make this choice are often viewed negatively because of it. So perception has completely flipped. Is there anything wrong with choosing to do that? Not at all. The point of the feminist movement is that women have a choice. So having children does not automatically mean staying at home full-time, thus not only obviously affecting our economy, but from a sociological standpoint, creating new role models for their daughters and their sons. In addition to this, as a result of this, most parents, not just moms but dads as well, are much less likely to stress a future homemaking role in raising their daughters. In other words, most parents don't raise their daughters with the general yet automatic expectation that they will be full-time mothers staying at home without their own income, even while the children are young. Another subtle yet meaningful difference. Instead, most parents are much more likely to insist their daughters strive for a good education or to have goals for themselves as adult women outside the home. And fathers want this for their daughters just as much as mothers do, which not only affects the daughters but the sons as well, as they are in the same environment. However, in general, males and females are still subject to different norms, different rules of behavior in society based solely on their gender. There continues to be gender differences and expectations at home, at work, at school, at church, everywhere. Differences do still exist. These differences in gender expectations encompass gender roles that are generally accepted by our society as a whole and stem from differences in socialization experiences that occur from early infancy, really from birth onward. We learn to behave in patterned, culturally prescribed ways. Kids learn at a very early age what it means to be a boy or a girl in our society through a whole variety of ways. I'm in my 50s and I'm still subject to gender socialization. We are all influenced by the people we come into contact with. We are all influenced by the media, by social media. All of these contribute to children experiencing the process of gender role socialization. This is the learning of behavior and attitudes considered appropriate for a given sex. So boys learn to be boys and girls learn to be girls. A lot of people feel that girls and boys are no longer socialized differently, that our society is much more aware and enlightened, that equality between the sexes has progressed so much that this kind of thing is almost non-existent at this point. Absolutely, progress has been made. However, although our society might not be as rigid in defining gender roles as we were historically speaking, it still occurs in very subtle ways all the time. And this starts at a very, very, very young age. In most families, boys and girls are treated differently from their first days of life. Not necessarily one better than the other, but differently. A child's earliest exposure to what it means to be male or female comes from their parents, and it has been documented over and over and over again that from the time their children are babies, parents treat sons and daughters differently. Not for the specific purpose of differentiating, they just do. And both mothers and fathers, there's no one guilty party here. Now, if we were to ask parents if they raise their sons or daughters differently, many would say, no, of course not, and would likely say they openly reject common gender stereotypes. But research tells us differently. In one well-known study dealing with how people respond to infants, adult men and women were asked to rate an infant's emotional responses after watching them react to 4 different stimuli. So it's the same baby. Half the adults were told the infant was male and half were told the infant was female. And the adults reported seeing different emotions and different levels of emotional arousal depending on the sex attributed to the infant. So the same infant's behavior was interpreted differently depending on what sex the baby was believed to be. So the researchers concluded that we judge babies differently depending on their perceived sex, that we bring gendered expectations to our interactions with infants and see only what we already think is consistent with these expectations. Thus, we are likely to interact with baby boys and girls differently based on our expectations. Another study looked at how mothers respond to risk-taking by their sons and daughters, and concluded from a very young age that girls and boys are handled and spoken to differently. That mothers seem to just expect more risky behavior from their sons than their daughters, and to be more concerned about injury to the daughters than their sons. In other words, they automatically expect rougher behavior from boys. In another study, it documented how children are exposed to different types of toys, clothing, and room decor that seem to suggest that for both parents, boundary reinforcement of gender and maintenance of traditional gender roles and behavior are important. So in other words, even when somebody's an infant or a toddler, their parent is making choices for them dependent on their perceived gender. And it was also noted in the same study that daughters had much more leeway in their gender than sons did. In other words, if daughters got a bit dirty, if they played with trucks, that was fine. But anytime a son demonstrated any kind of non-conforming behavior, that was not fine. In another study, it was documented that parents grant boys and girls different amounts of freedom and responsibility. So, for example, boys would be allowed to walk home from school by themselves, but girls wouldn't be at the same age. Boys would be allowed to go to the park by themselves, girls wouldn't be. They'd be told to play in the yard. And in another study that has been replicated several times, it studied differential socialization experiences involving mother-infant interactions during the first 3 months of life. And it was repeatedly found that mothers tended to stimulate male infants to a higher activity level, more than female infants, and to comment on male infants differently. So, oh, look at how strong you are, look how tough you are, but they wouldn't say that to a female infant. These are examples of just tiny, subtle ways that children internalize parental messages regarding gender at an early age. And as their infants begin to grow, in general, parents seem to almost subconsciously encourage their sons and daughters to be typically masculine or feminine, with everything those two terms imply, according to typical socially constructed gender norms in our society. Now, keep in mind when I use the terms masculine and feminine, this doesn't mean super, super girly or super, super manly. You know, I think we automatically picture a parent encouraging a little boy to play with trucks and get as dirty as possible, or encouraging their daughter to wear princess dresses. But encouraging a child to align with their gender does not necessarily mean those extremes. Most parents tend to almost subconsciously encourage their children to prefer certain colors of clothes, or TV shows, or cartoons, or toys, or colors, or interests. Now, you might be thinking, well, parents don't do that anymore. They don't tell boys and girls which shows they should like, or even trying to point them in a certain direction. What we have to remember is before children have the ability to express choice for themselves, their parents are making choices for them based on their own experiences of socialization, their own preferences and expectations and ideas about what a girl or boy should be like. So up until at least age 5 or 6, parents are making the vast majority of choices for you, and all of those choices combined suggest that certain preferences are acceptable and normal and typical and expected. In addition, when children make certain choices of what they want to watch on TV, or what they want to wear or play with, or what activities they do or do not want to be involved in, the reactions of their parents to their choices indicate something to them as well. If their parents are surprised, that indicates to the child that their choice is atypical. If their parents are surprised in even a slightly negative way, that indicates to the child that on some level, maybe even the tiniest level, that their parents are not happy with their choice or even simply not fully supportive. Maybe their parents don't say anything at all, but there's a nonverbal reaction. You know, parents communicate with their kids in a variety of ways, their happiness or unhappiness, their approval or disapproval. So no, parents are usually not so open and direct regarding what they expect of their children, specifically directing them in one way or another because they are a boy or a girl. But their children absorb all of the tiny, individual, minute instances like a sponge, like grains of sand in a jar. Then add in clear gender differences in toys and in TV and all of those things, and boys and girls receive very distinct messages about gender from these as well. A Korean artist created an exhibition a few years ago called the Pink and Blue Project, and her medium is photography. This was a photographic series exploring the links between cultural preferences, gender socialization, and identity through the bedrooms and belongings of various little girls and boys. So this exhibition took place at the Children's Museum of the Art. And again, the point of this is to demonstrate how color preferences are socially ingrained. And again, you might say, well, that's what he likes. It isn't just because he's a boy. It's simply what he's interested in. And I would respond to you by asking, why? Why is it that so many boys are interested in stereotypical boys' toys like trucks and cars, while so many girls are interested in stereotypical girls' toys that are pink and frilly? Why does this continue to be such a norm? Where does that overwhelming difference in society come from? Academics who study this would clearly point out that it comes from gender socialization, and that something as simple as the toys a child plays with can have a subtle yet significant effect on how they view the real world around them. Some research has found a significant connection between children's toy preferences being related to parental sex typing, meaning what they view as being typical occupations and activities of their mom and dad, and more general adult sex typing in general. In other words, the toys they play with influence their expectations and perceptions of real people, and thus suggest to children what their expectation should be for themselves as an adult, as well as what their expectation should be for others of their own and opposite sex. Very, very simply, what you have around you indicates to you what the world should be like, what the norms are and should be. So it is a child's entire environment, the entirety of their experiences and what they see and are exposed to, not just in the home. Many studies have found that children at 2.5 years of age use gender stereotypes already to generalize a variety of activities, objects, and occupations. So what this means is that they see just a few examples, and they take those few examples to generalize them to the entire world around them. Much the same way that people do who are racist, a person generalizes or stereotypes a few examples to represent all people of that race. Children tend to do the same with examples of gender that they see in and around their home and their immediate environment. And sometimes, even if a child has an example right in front of them that completely goes against gender stereotypes, because it's just one, they'll be in complete denial about something in front of them, if what's in front of them does not conform to the gender expectations they already have. Dr. Amy Sheldon conducted research in this area, how children use what they see in their immediate environment to then make broader generalizations about the entire world in regards to gender expectations. In this study, one female subject whose own mother was a doctor insisted that women could not be doctors, only men, even though this child had an example right in front of them at home contradicting what they were saying. Their own mother was a doctor. And Dr. Sheldon concluded that because the rest of the world around them reinforced the gendered stereotype so strongly, that this is what the child latched onto. I can even give you my own example of this. When I was married, I had a stepson who was about 4 or 5 at the time. And he had no contact with his birth mom, so he was with my husband and I all the time. For all intents and purposes, I was the mother figure. One day we were out doing something, I can't even remember what. We're driving back home down the waterfront, and he's in the back seat, and he asked me if it's okay for a girl to drive. And I said, well, of course it is. You know, I'm driving right now. And he said, really? Are you sure it's okay for girls to drive? I said, yes, of course it is. I'm driving right now. Why would you ask that? He said, because I only see boys driving. So in his little head, he made the connection, or he decided that it's only men who drive, or at least that that's the norm. It's widely accepted that generally, that generally speaking, by about age 2, kids realize they are a girl or a boy. Not just physically, but socially and culturally and psychologically as well. That they've begun to be aware of and integrate gender differences as well. And it's further estimated that by about age 5 or 6, they have begun to very firmly learn their gender and the associated behaviors that go along with or is expected of their gender. And by the way, many gay and lesbian adults also report that in retrospect, it was around this age that they had realized that they did not like the opposite sex either. These are just brief examples of how we are all socialized according to our gender. Sometimes it is deliberate, sometimes it is subtle and unintentional, which will absolutely have an effect on how one performs or achieves in school, how they act, what they're interested in, all of it. If you have been socialized to act a certain way, to have certain personality traits that are considered desirable, while purposely minimizing others because they are not really appropriate for you, to do some things and not others because they are what you should or should not be interested in, to like certain things, whether material things you play with or activities like sports or what kind of academic subjects you are more suited for. All of that will affect your educational trajectory, which is further reinforced at school.